All right, it's 9:30. We will call the county board meeting to order. At this time, I'd ask you to sign in. I see everybody has done that at this point in time. And I would call on Supervisor Brad Hamilton to please come forward for the invocation. While Brad's working his way up here, I'd ask everyone to please rise for the invocation and then remain standing for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Let us pray. Father, thank you for this day you have given us to do the work of the people we represent. Help us make great decisions that will positively affect those we are working for. We also ask you watch over and protect those that keep us safe, both home and abroad. Heal this land and calm the fires and storms that are trying to divide us. In your name we pray. Amen. Amen.
Please join in the Pledge of Allegiance. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, and thank you everyone for being here today. Al is appearing with us today, Supervisor Brad, virtually. So I'll try to remember to get your vote on all of the issues that come before us today. First order of business today is to take care of the minutes from the previous session, and I entertain a motion. I have a motion by Hamilton. On the board, do I have a second on the minutes?
Second.
I have a second by Supervisor Bry. Is there any discussion on that? Any discussion on the minutes? Any discussion? All in favor of approval, please signify by aye.
Aye.
And that motion carries. Thank you. We have no excusals today. We have no resignations. Under appointments today, we have to the Board of Adjustment a 3-year term for Dan Forbes. And then with no objection, I'm going to take these together. Any objection that I take these appointments together? All right, seeing none. And the second one is something I didn't even know existed. That is the Marshfield Sewer Service Area Policy Advisory Committee. A 2-year term for Adam Decline. So again, I would entertain a motion to that effect, and I have a motion by Supervisor. I already have one, thanks. I already have one by Supervisor Hamilton and a second by Supervisor Wagner. Any discussion? All right, seeing none, all in favor signify by aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
And that motion carries unanimously. Is there any public comment today? Any public comment? It doesn't look like that, so I'm just going to work my way down here real quick. We have a couple of acknowledgments and recognitions. Had to remember where I put my cheat sheets here. This is one of these times that we come to generally in April when we recognize those outgoing supervisors who have served our county over the years. Some have served for a long time, some for a couple of years, but their service is just greatly appreciated. The fact that they step up within our community to help guide our policy and to work within this board's parameters. So the first person, we only have one who could join us today, but the first person that I'd like to recognize is Mark Holbrook. And Mark served from 2018 to 2020. He happens to be in Fort Collins, Colorado today traveling, so couldn't join us today. But during Mark's term, by the way, he ran for the state assembly back in, I think, 2016 for the 70th Assembly District. So he's somebody who's been involved in politics for quite some time, and then threw his hat in the ring for the county board, was elected in 2018 where he served on the Health and Human Services, Conservation, Education, and Economic Development Committee, as well as a liaison officer to the Ho-Chunk Nation. So Mark, I wish you could be here today. I wish you the best in your travels. If you happen to be watching this on public access, I'm sure you're not, but just in case you are, maybe catch it later, I want to thank you for your contribution to this board. And we do have a plaque for him that we will present at some time, unless he just comes in to pick it up. The second person I wanted to mention is our previous county board chairman, Doug Mahan. Tried to contact Doug to get him up here today, could not do that. I certainly want to thank Doug for his service, for stepping up. Sometimes I don't think people understand the commitment it takes to be a board supervisor and the commitment it takes to sit in the chairman's chair. You literally are in the courthouse every single day. And the other person I want to thank in that regard is Jennifer, his wife, because I don't know, until you actually serve here, I don't know the public knows how much your phone rings, how often it is, And it's fairly unusual to get off the phone before about 9:30 or 10 o'clock every night if you return the phone calls that you get. And Doug stepped up in that capacity, served our county well. Doug, I wish you could be here today. We wish you the best going forward in the future. And we do have a plaque here for you, as well as your name tag. At some point in time, we will get that presented to you. The last person we have as an outgoing supervisor today is Marion Hokamp. I could probably sit up here and make a speech for half an hour based on Marion's service to our county. Marion was first elected to this board in 1994, and she served until 2020, which is phenomenal. And I think the thing that struck me the most, and I think if there's a takeaway for other county board supervisors, it's when I first got here, which is a lot of years ago, Marion was one of those people who worked as a mentor, who stepped up, who was always available to answer questions or to help. And that's the thing that I always hope is a guiding principle for current county board supervisors as we get new members joining the board. So Marion, on that personal note, I can't thank you enough. So anybody who's lived in the Wisconsin Rapids area since the early 90s has known Marion Hokamp and her service to the community. I mean, she is virtually, and I'm not going to read these because I'm going to let her talk about it, but she's virtually served on every single committee in the county. She's been involved in every part of county government, in city government, and basically in every facet of life in Wisconsin Rapids for the last minimally 3 decades, if not more. Especially in those areas of services to the aging community and her service to the human services groups. Those have been phenomenal. And like I said, I could read 3 pages of things that Marion has done. So between the human services, the aging commissions, and her work with the highway committee, you would find Marion in this courthouse, involved in meetings, or at different state conferences, with the highway committees and her husband Joe, whether it be at the WCA conferences, Marion was always present. So Marion, if you would come on up here, I would greatly appreciate it. Now normally, when we do this, we present a plaque. And in this case, the plaque says, presented to Marion Hokamp for 26 years of dedicated service to the people of Wood County as a Wood County Board Supervisor from April 1994 to April 2020. Now normally we give this plaque away and we give them their name tag. One of these. Except Marion was extremely frugal and fiscally responsible in her tenure as a county board supervisor. So instead of giving that to her, she gave it to her son. So now we have generational representation and we didn't have to do another name tag. So Marion, I want to thank you for that. I want to thank you sincerely. I'd shake your hand or give you a hug, but we're in these times. But I want to turn the podium over to you. I want to present this plaque to you, which I will leave here for you. Cannot thank you enough. So if you would please say a few words, we'd greatly appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank everybody. I can remember a few years back, I went and tried to help a gentleman to run for county board. And I went out there and all the neighbors got to vote for him, Except I wasn't old enough to vote myself. So I've been out campaigning for people for years. And I thank them for that. Thanks for supporting me. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Marion. Thank you for being here. I don't think we can show enough gratitude, appreciation, and provide enough applause for the years that you have served the residents of Wood County and maybe even more specifically Wisconsin Rapids in your roles there. So again, thank you very much. All right, we're going to have an interesting meeting today. We don't have a tremendous amount in the packet from a resolution standpoint, but we do have a presentation on the bond issue that we're handling right now, and then we do have the wage study presentation that will be done by Patrick Lynn when we get through this packet. So we're going to go through the packet. In that process, we'll roll out the bond presentation, and I couldn't be more ecstatic on what those interest rates came in at. I'm not going to share that. I'll leave that for the other people. And at the end of the meeting, we will have the presentation on the wage study by Patrick Lynn. So getting into the packet, on page 5, we have the Operations Committee meeting minutes of Tuesday, August 18th. Followed on page 6 by the same committee, their meeting of September 1st, and that's page 6, 7, and 8. On page 9, we have the monthly letter of comments from our clerk. Pages 10 through 17, beginning with the monthly letter of comments from our finance director, along with various financial reports. That's pages 10 through 17. Beginning on page 18 and going through page 21 is the presentation to the Operations Committee, the 2020 capital financing. Some of the background information we got as we started down this road. We have the monthly letter of comments beginning on page 22 and running through page 25 from the Human Resources Department. Today, Kim McGrath, our HR director, will be joining us virtually today. So she will see her on the screen, but not here in the room. That's pages 22 through 25. The treasurer's report on page 26. And then, if you look in your packet, if you read this, pages 27 through 41. 27 begins the resolution and all the supporting documentation that goes along with that through page 41. And Trent, if you would at least present that, and then we'll move forward to Mr. Wagner for a little explanation.
This will be Resolution 20-9-1. Resolution awarding the sale of $3,990,000, $3,990,000 general obligation promissory notes.
Okay, I need a motion to that effect, and I'm going to put this on the floor. I have a motion by Hamilton. I have a second by Wagner. Okay, at this point in time, I'd open this up for discussion. I'm going to turn this over to Supervisor Wagner. You can introduce, if you'd like, Justin Fisher, who was representing us with Baird, or you can just summarize however you want, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you see in the packet, the bond sale took place. We have to, I think we have to vote on it before 10:30 this morning, so I won't go into too much of a detail. But I will reiterate what I said in the committee meeting just a little while ago. In all the years I've been in public service, I've never seen an interest rate on a municipal issue this low. Our interest rate is 0.78%, less than 1%. Partially, this is due to the results of the rating call. And I have to thank the chairman and the other members of the staff that were in on the rating call for their presentation of Wood County to the bond buyers, which I think made this rate possible. This is basically unheard of. I understand, I think I just saw an email, I think this rate saves us almost $200,000 over in interest over what they were predicting when we came through on this. This is a remarkable thing for Wood County. It's going to help us achieve that plateau level for our borrowing in the future rather quickly. On the phone is Justin Fisher from Baird, who is there. If you have any questions, you can ask him about it. He is far better at the technical stuff than I am. So with that, I will leave the floor and open it up for any other questions for Mr. Fisher.
Somebody needs to mute their mic.
Yeah, if somebody has their mic, if you have a mic on that is unmuted, please mute unless you're ready to speak. We'll pick up some background.
Mr. Fisher.
Okay. And then at this point, Justin Fisher, if you're on the line, if you would like to give a short presentation, it would be appreciated.
Absolutely, we'd be glad to. Mentioned excellent rate the county received yesterday. The issue summary basically is the 10-year financing. So the maturities range from 2021 to 2030. So 10-year financing, that bond rating is a AA1. So the second highest bond rating possible that you can receive as a municipal issuer. So excellent out there. When we went into the bond rate process, there was some discussion about, is the county going to receive potentially a one-notch downgrade because of, COVID issues that would be affecting the nursing home, the mental health facility, etc. And as mentioned, the county officials that were on the bond rate did an excellent job mitigating any risks or any concerns that Moody's had going into that call. With mitigating those concerns allowed Moody's to get comfortable with maintaining the AA1 rating. And while, as the better rating, the lower the interest rate. And then that is a direct correlation. The better rating, the lower the interest rates. And that, as I mentioned, 0.781 or 0.781%, under 1%. It's an unbelievable rate for 10-year financing. So, it's a congratulations to the county for strong management, a strong fund balance, and really doing everything necessary to achieve such a strong market rate. Now, does everyone have a packet in front of them? Do you want me to go through the details about the long-term financing, or?
Justin, I don't think we need to do that unless we have some questions, and then I would let you explain that.
Perfect.
This has been rolled out. Appreciate the indulgence in letting, our advisors speak and at least explain this a little bit. Is there any discussion on the resolution before you? We have a motion, we have a second, we have this on the floor. Is there any discussion? Supervisor Clendenning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think it's exceptional that we have that bond rating, of course, and I am voting for it. But I just to let the board know, I heard some discouraging, in my opinion, news about maybe we'll go with a cheaper jail. Well, here is the time for me that I think we should go for something that will last. And the bond rating that we got right now, I think is the best time for it. So I hope that those people that are thinking of having a cheaper product, they can really dig down and think about this, especially with the bond rating we have. Thank you.
Any other discussion on the resolution? Any discussion? All right, I ask you as the clerk choose this up to please vote. Mr. Bry, Supervisor Bry?
Yes.
Supervisor Bry votes yes. I see Supervisor Hahn's working on it, he's having a little trouble, so is Supervisor Zerflu. Supervisor Hahn is in now. While they're working on Supervisor Zerflu back there, I really, the bond rating calls are sometimes a little bit nerve-wracking. You never know where they're going to go, but I really do want to thank our finance department, Al Thurber, Ed Newton, and our treasurer, Heather Garrett, who helped out on that. We had a great call, it worked out real well, and really appreciate the effort, the time you took in providing all the information. Supervisor Zerflu.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've been advised by IT that I will have to make a voice vote on this issue until the repairs are done.
And your vote is?
What's your vote?
What's your vote, Supervisor Zerflu?
My vote is yes.
Thank you. All right, the resolution passed unanimously. I thank you very much, and again, I thank all of the supervisors who worked in the committees, the operations committee, Supervisor Wagner, our advisors at Baird did a great job, and then our finance department, our treasurer, and the other department heads who helped put the information together. Supervisor Wagner stated it, but I have never, ever seen a bond come in at this rate. This was just phenomenal. I was surprised. In fact, when I saw the numbers yesterday, I actually asked if they were correct. I couldn't believe it. So fantastic job, everybody. Job well done. All right, that takes us to page 42 in your packet. Page 42. And that So pages 42 through 46 are resolutions on tax deed eligible properties. I'd ask the clerk to please read that.
This will be Resolution 20-9-2. Tax deed eligible property to authorize the tax deeding of property in compliance with Section 7514 Wisconsin statutes. Fiscal note, the back taxes, special assessment, special charges, delinquent utilities, publication fees, and tax deeding expense totals $92,304.68.
Okay, and I have a motion by Supervisor Hamilton, a second by Supervisor Clendenning. Is there any discussion on the resolution? Any discussion on the resolution? All right, Trent, when you get ready here, I would ask supervisors to please vote. Supervisor Bry?
Yes.
Thank you. And that resolution passed unanimously. After I do this 100 or 200 times, I'm going to remember Supervisor Bry is attending the meeting virtually. All right, back to the packet. Page 47, beginning on page 47, the monthly report from our health department, beginning with Sue Comfermans, our directors, pages 47 through 51. Any questions there? Beginning on page 52 and running through page 59 is the report from the Human Services Department, beginning with Director Bruings. Again, that's 52 through 59. Any questions or concerns? Our Veteran Service Officers report on page 60, 61, and 62. And then that brings us to page 63, the next resolution in the packet.
This will be Resolution 20-9-3. To create a jail discharge planner case manager position. Fiscal note, anticipated wages and benefits based on a grade 7, step 6, total $72,372.19.
Okay, I have a motion by Supervisor Fire, a second by Supervisor Hamilton. Is there any discussion on this resolution? Supervisor Roser.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I just wanted to point out that last whereas at the bottom of the resolution. This is a position that's only fully funded in 2021, and then 90% funded in 2022, and then 80% funded for the rest of the 5-year grant. So I just wanted to bring that up because there will be some discussion about supporting this position with taxpayer dollars after that first year of full funding. And of course, the Health and Human Services Committee will make a recommendation. But we have asked as a committee for really good documentation on the efficacy of this position to see what our return on investment is. And then we'll consider that documentation as we move forward with a recommendation on whether to continue funding over the 5-year grant. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other discussion? Any other discussion? All right, I ask you to go to the board and please vote. Supervisor. Every time this comes up, Trent kicks me and goes, ask Supervisor Bry. Supervisor Bry, your vote?
Yes.
Thank you, Al.
Dave, did you vote?
Supervisor LaFontaine, is it locked in? And that motion carries 18-1. Moving on in the packet, page 64, another resolution coming from the Public Safety Committee.
This will be Resolution 20-9-4. To authorize Wood County to enter into an agreement and seek funding under Wisconsin Statutes 165.90 for law enforcement services on restricted tribal lands. Fiscal note, $35,730.
Okay, I have a motion by Supervisor Fire, a second by Supervisor Hamilton. Is there any discussion on this resolution? Any discussion? All right, again, I'd ask you to please vote. Supervisor Bry?
Yes.
Thank you, Supervisor. That resolution passes unanimously. Thank you. Moving on in the packet, page 65 begins the minutes of the Seed Committee from August 18th. That's 65, 6, and 7. Their minutes from September 2nd, beginning on page 68 and running through page 74, 68 through 74. We have various minutes from the Golden Sands Resource Conservation Development Council, beginning with their Personnel and Finance Committee minutes on 75 and 76. In total, their minutes run through page 86, their various committees and general board meeting. Is there any question on any of the Golden Sands minutes? Okay, moving on to page 87 in your packet. That's monthly letter of comments from University Extension. Began at 87, running through page 90. Monthly letter of comments from Land and Water Conservation Department, beginning on 91 and running through page 96, 91 through 96. Staff reports from our Planning and Zoning Office, beginning with Director Grudenberg on page 97 and running through page 102. Beginning on page 103, we have economic recovery minutes. These cover minutes from the 30th of July to the 25th of August. That begins on 103 and runs through 108. There's also PPE discussion meeting minutes in there. So any questions on those? Again, that's 103 through 108. North Central Regional Planning Commission, 109 through 114. Citizen Groundwater Group meeting of August 17th, beginning on 115 and 116, 115 and 116. We have the, from Adam Decline, the planner, we have a staff memorandum beginning on 117 and running through 121, and this is in regard to some of the changes in the two upcoming resolutions from the Seed Committee. These both involve a zoning amendment for the town of Grand Rapids. Does anybody have a problem, having read these, if we take these two resolutions together? Is there any objection to taking these two resolutions together? All right, seeing none, I'd ask the clerk to please read both resolutions.
This will be Resolution 20-9-5. To approve a zoning amendment to the Town of Grand Rapids zoning map. Fiscal note, no cost to Wood County. The Town of Grand Rapids is responsible for any costs associated with administering their town zoning ordinance. Resolution 20-9-6. Approve an amendment to the Town of Grand Rapids zoning ordinance. Fiscal note, no cost to Wood County. The Town of Grand Rapids is responsible for any costs associated with administering their town zoning ordinance.
Thank you. And I have a motion by Supervisor Hamilton, a second by Supervisor Clendenning. Is there any discussion on these resolutions? Any discussion? Please vote. Mr. Bry?
Yes.
Thank you, Al. And that resolution also passed unanimously. Going back to the packet, beginning on page 124 and running through 128 is the September 4th meeting of the Judicial and Legislative Committee, 124 through 128, J&L. There is some additional information behind that on 133. Some of these are bills and other things that are forwarded, but those are concluded in the packet. If I go to page 134, I have the monthly report from the Child Support Agency, followed by the Corp Council's monthly letter of comments on 135. Any questions on any of those before we go to this next resolution? The next resolution deals with a developer's agreement between the county and Savion, and I've said before in full disclosure, I did some land work for Savion when they were putting this project together. I'm going to recuse myself on this particular issue, so there's no optic of any, anything that would be inappropriate. Although that relationship has ended quite some time ago when I did the early work, I still did have some involvement with them at that time. So at this time, Mr. Fisher, I'm just going to give you the gavel too, and let you run the rest of this one.
All right. Any discussion, or is there a motion?
You
So
want me
I'm
to
gonna
introduce
do
it?
Oh, you went, sorry.
Yeah, you want me to
My
introduce it?
first time, forgive me.
This will be resolution, with your permission, Mr. Vice Chair, this will be resolution 20-9-7. To authorize entry into a developer and operations agreement pertaining to the establishment and management of a large solar array complex. Fiscal note, none. By law, the county will indirectly receive repayment receive a payment in lieu of tax type of compensation from the operator of any power generating utility, such as this one, irrespective of the agreement. The agreement serves more to protect the interests of the county than it does to directly deal with compensation.
All right, and we have a motion from Mr. Fire and a second from Hamilton. So any discussion? Supervisor Rosar.
Thank you. So as we've discussed this, it kind of was brought to our attention that the county really doesn't have much of a stake in this. And I mean, I read through this and I thought, you know, what really is the benefit of us passing this resolution? Because our corporation counsel has kind of told us, as my understanding, that we really had no leverage in all of this. So I guess I'm looking for a little explanation about why we think we need to pass this resolution. And I guess Corp Counsel probably is the best person to answer that question, if that would be appropriate.
Yep. Unless there's any objection from the body, would Corporation Counsel Kastenholz address this?
Thank you. Okay, so yes, I did, and thank you, Mr. Vice Chair, I did lament the fact that the county wasn't in a position to be in a level playing field as you often are in negotiations. We simply weren't here. The developer and subsequent operator, whoever they may be, don't have an obligation to enter into this type of agreement with the county. We have no zoning control or other leverage here. But they, Savion wants to enter into an agreement with us. I think that may help it grease the skids a little bit before the Public Service Commission and getting the permissions and authorizations they need from the state. And it's an opportunity for them to exercise good citizenship, corporate citizenship. And so the county was able to do a couple things with regards to this instrument. We're able to make sure that any highway issues are addressed, or there's a methodology for doing so. We got into quite a bit of an issue with regards to radio communications and how we're going to handle those issues in the future. There were some environmental type of concerns, generally speaking, that the Supervisor Lightman was heavily involved with and advocating for his constituents in that part of the county. And so there are those matters addressed here. So I think it benefits the county to enter into this. There was a prior version of the agreement that was things were put in there that were adversarial to us, and that wasn't beneficial, but this is beneficial. It again, doesn't provide us with any additional monetary compensation, but it does address other issues that are useful for us, I believe. If there are specific questions other than general comments, please let me know.
Any questions? Supervisor Clendany?
Yes, I'd also like to add the airport. What does that have the effect of those rates have on airplanes coming into the airport? That also was discussed. I think it's a good thing. It discussed the whole period of this, and it's a 25-year to 30-year deal. So I think it's important that we have this.
Any other comments or questions at this time? Seeing none, we will vote.
Supervisor Bryan.
Oh, thank you. Supervisor Bry, your vote?
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously. I will hand the gavel back to our chair.
Nice job. All right, that was pages 136 was the resolution and the background information through 147. So let's go to page 148 in your packet, which is minutes of the Highway Infrastructure Recreation Committee of September 3rd. The minutes begin on 148, 149, and 150. Any question on the minutes? Monthly letter of comments from Highway Commissioner Roland Hawk beginning on 151. and running through 156. Monthly letter of comments from the Park and Forestry Department, beginning with Director Schoolies on 157 and running through page 168. Any questions there? The Property Information Technology Committee meeting minutes from Tuesday, August 18th on 169, 170. Same committee, their meeting of Tuesday, September 8th on 171 and 172. We have monthly letter of comments from our facilities manager, Ruben Van Tassel, beginning on 174 and ending on 174. Thought there were a couple pages of those, and that brings us to another resolution in the packet on page 175. I'd ask the clerk to please read that.
This will be Resolution 20-9-8, to amend County Board Rule Number 42 to essentially delegate the oversight of the acquisition of real property to the Property and Information Technology Committee, recognizing that final approvals are required of the County Board itself via resolution. Fiscal note, none.
All right.
Motion approved.
Thank you, Mr. Bryant. A motion by Clendenning ahead of you here and a second by Supervisor Fire. Is there any discussion on the resolution? Any discussion on the resolution? I don't see any. Get ready to vote. I ask you to please vote. Supervisor Bry, your vote is?
Yes.
Thank you, Al. And again, that resolution passes unanimously. Page 176 in your packet is the Central Wisconsin State Fair Building Committee, their special meeting on 176. Supervisor Ashbeck. Thank you, Al.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Starting next Wednesday, we're going to go back into having a fair food. We had it here a while back, and it was a fantastic. A lot of vendors sold out. It'll start at noon and it'll run from Wednesday to Saturday or Sunday. I mean, so if anybody gets hungry someday, we'll have to stop in. Because we do get 15% profit back from the vendors. It has helped us.
Thank you. Opportunity to support the effort. All right, that's page 176. When we get to page 177, we have the Central Wisconsin State Fair Board meeting minutes of July 27th, and that's on 177 and 178. The South Central Library System Board of Trustees minutes on 179, 80, and 81. The minutes of the University Commission of May 21st on 182 to 184. And that brings us to the end of the packet. And so at this time, we're going to move to the presentation of the wage study, which was done by Carlson Detman. I have Patrick Lynn here, who's going to do that presentation. This has been something we've been working on for quite some time. Supervisor Wagner, do you want to preface this?
Thank you. As you mentioned, this has been going on for quite some time, since actually before I got back on the board. And just last week or so, the final numbers for the wage were put out, the wage compensations that they were put out. They are basically working with HR now to answer questions that any staff might have about that. We will not be voting on this today. My understanding is that we are going to have the supervisors look this over, talk to their committees, or talk to their department heads about what the compensation plan is doing within their departments, and then we can bring them back and, as they might say down south, we will cuss and discuss it on the floor. So, with that, I will turn it over to Patrick and let him brief you on where we're at. Although I'm talking just to stall while he's setting up.
Thank you.
So.
Any recipes you want to read or anything like that?
Well, most in this room have probably had some contact with Patrick during his career. I think I worked with him the first time when he was a county government employee way back in Calumet County. A long time ago, previous life, right?
Way back.
Way back, where I was invited up to their county to do a presentation when we did our wage initial study. So as they get the technology loaded up here.
So without further ado, I give you Patrick.
I think it's safe for me to do this while I'm
Yes.
safely distanced from everybody. I think I speak loud enough, but I also know that we have people
On TV.
on TV, so I just want to make certain that I'm projecting okay. Good point by Ed from the standpoint of today's session is intended to be entirely educational. I believe with the operations committee, we met 4 different times, 2 in person, 2 remotely, in varying degrees of detail, some excruciating detail along the way. The goal is not to provide you the same level of excruciating detail, not for lack of transparency, but also just to kind of be cognizant of the time. I allude to it later in the presentation, but due to some unforeseen circumstances, we intended to having a document out last week. Just life happened and was not able to do that. However, we will have a executive summary this Friday that will go into greater detail. That's one of the things when working with boards, councils, and departments that we wrestle with all the time, is that some board members just give me the straight scoop, is this good, is this bad, and that's enough detail. Some want a little bit of a look underneath the hood. The executive summary will provide that as it relates to some of the methodologies and some of the rationale for some of the decisions and recommendations. The decisions we're asking you to make and the recommendations for those. So again, starting this Friday, that document should be released to the board for their review. In terms of what we're trying to accomplish this morning, I think one, just setting the stage in terms of the world that we're living in. I have 60 some slides in this presentation. I'm only sharing a fraction of those. Most of those are header slides. Yeah, Ed said thank you, and I echo that sentiment. But I think it's important to know the world you're working in and the challenges that you have. I think we want to give you a high-level overview of the work that was completed and some of the processes we took, as well as getting those key policy questions set, because that's the heart and soul of at the board level of what's going to make this plan successful in the long term, and then prepare you for final adoption if and when that occurs. I know there's a preferred route in terms of how it gets approved. I also know that these things can take a life of their own, and that's up to the board itself in terms of how this goes. So just first kind of talking briefly about some of those challenges that are out there. And the first couple of slides, are all pre-COVID. And in fact, any data that we're looking at, for the most part, unless you're dealing with flash surveys, are pre-COVID data. That we have had over the course of the last decade or so, we've been witnessing a generation exiting the workforce in the baby boomers. We've been expecting that for the better part of 2 to 3 decades. It was talked about when I started in county government 26 years ago. So yeah, it's been a while. But now we're also beginning to see Generation X become eligible for retirement under some of the rules. The Wisconsin retirement system allows for retirement at age 55. Well, if Generation X truly started in 1965, now we're beginning to meet that threshold. So we're going to see the next wave, and the wave after that, and after that, generations age out of the workforce. The problem is, especially with the baby boomer generation, it's one of the largest generations our country's ever seen, and finding that talent to fill those positions. And that's why we care about that so much, is the hiring concerns and being competitive. And I have a graph in here that I have hidden. I can certainly bring it up, that kind of shows the stark contrast between pre-COVID, the competitive wage pressures, and just with 1 month's worth of change in data from layoffs and discharges, just craters in terms of competitiveness. But the other challenge we've seen, and those who have listened to anything that Mark O'Connell's had to say at the WCA for the past couple decades probably, I forget how long he's been there, but the point is that he's talked a lot about the aging of the Wisconsin workforce, the aging of the population, and what are we going to do to be able to fill those classifications, and the pressures of this sort of data. You can see that as you become, blue is not necessarily a good color in this case. If those highlighted in green tend to be younger from a population standpoint. The darker the blue becomes, the older the county is projected to become over the course of the next 20 years or so. And the point is that we see lots of pressures, and this places pressures in so many areas, not just from a recruitment and retention, but on our healthcare system. As we see not only are people getting older that require healthcare, but also our caregivers providing, getting older and not having the positions to fill those. So again, the aging of our workforce and our population places tremendous pressure on us. I just walked through last week on a private sector project. I walked through a factory that used to employ about 1,000 employees. I think it was closer to 1,100. And now they have 160. Still doing the same work, but you walk through and there's robot on top of robot on top of robot. That's part of the solution we're seeing in the rest of the world in addressing some of these challenges. There's not much you can do from a robotic standpoint in many of the aspects of county government. If wishing made it so, that would be one thing, but it just doesn't work that way. In terms of the county's data itself, and I break this data out into two segments, and we talked about this a little bit at the community level, that the general county, meaning everyone other than the care facilities, and then the care facilities data. They often tell two different stories, and in this case I think it's absolutely true. First, about 33%, 32% in this case, so about a third of your workforce is at or over the age of 50 for that segment of workers separate from the care facilities. That's a big number. I mean, if I look at, if I forecast out in terms of your recruitment activity long-term, just from retirement, not from the normal turnover that exists, on a monthly basis when people leaving for other opportunities, this will place a great deal of pressure on an organization, and this number is low compared to what we typically see. You've seen some of the exiting of the employees from the workforce, I would presume, and I think the next slide will prove that out. And so again, kind of putting that on the horizon that your department, your human resources function, whether this number was higher or if in this case, just a little bit lower than our typical viewpoint, it's going to place a lot of pressure on the organization to bring people into the organization. And the other view that we take is, with your existing employees, what is their age ranges? And this tells us, I'm sorry, not age ranges, years of service. I'm sorry, I misspoke there. But that tells us, and our theory, and I think our theory is pretty darn close to being accurate, that once somebody reaches 5 years of service with an employer, they found some redeeming quality in you. Either you're convenient to work at, you're a good place to work for, good supervisors, good pay, good benefits, whatever it might be, but that magic number tends to be somewhere in the 5-year range, that the likelihood of you retaining them longer than that increases substantially. And one of these days, I'm sure I need to do some sort of a study to validate that. But you're sitting at about 44% of your workforce with less than 5 years of service. That's a big number. Not huge. I would say that typically in county government, non-nursing home, non-care facility type numbers, we'd see about a third, especially after we saw the big wave after Act 10 and the few years that came after that. So 44% is a larger number. I'm not ringing alarm bells knowing that you've had some natural turnover as it appears from retirement. But we also do the same analysis for the nursing homes. And when I say that, I'm very careful about that because I know there's some sensitivity, so I need to make certain I'm calibrating to care facilities and not nursing homes. But you're looking at about 42% of the workforce at or over the age of 50. There's two things, and kind of our two different viewpoints of the world on this. One, there's a number of jobs out at the various facilities that employ people who tend to be older. And when you look at some of the congregate meal site jobs that occur up at Norwood, certainly are a reflection of that. But you also have two facilities that tend to employ people who are younger. Oftentimes, one of their first jobs out of school, when you look at housekeeping type jobs or nursing assistants, where maybe this is a progression in their career. But again, 40%, it's going to place a great deal of pressure. And this number of 58% or pushing 60%, in the neighborhood of 2/3 of your workforce with less than 5 years of service, tells us that perhaps there are some competitive concerns that we need to be prepared to address. But it's also, I think, a hallmark of the highly competitive skilled care and non-skilled care environment that you have with local hospitals, other care facilities that are competing for the same talent that you are. So again, this sets the stage for why are we at where we're at. In terms of overall methodology, we talk a lot about compensation. The primary focus of this process was to talk about compensation, but we talk about other things as well. When we talk about compensation, that's one part of a three-legged stool that we call our total rewards model. Compensation being one of them. Benefits are incredibly important. They help you bring and keep the talent that you have. But the other facet being the employee experience. How do employees interact and commit to the organization throughout their entire history, from recruitment to termination? How is that environment for people to work in? And oftentimes, if everything else is competitive, this is equally important, if not more important. We spend a lot of time, in fact, my colleague, Jenna Bidwell, who actually lives here in Wisconsin Rapids, spends the majority of her time working on matters relating to the employee experience and working with organizations on those matters. In terms of a sample process overview, and I tailored this just a little bit to reflect some of the work we did with Wood County. First of all, I'll tell you there's no such thing as a typical process. Everyone kind of takes on its own life. And in the environment in which we're in now is absolutely the case in terms of, meetings that typically have been in person became virtual, so on and so forth. So again, navigating through this was a little bit more complex than normal, but we did accomplish what we needed to, such as having the necessary conversations with departments, seeking their feedback of what works with your system today, what doesn't work, what are some things we need to be aware of. Had some very good feedback from day one from your departments. Had the employee orientations prior to this whole mess setting in, so we were able to kick off that process. I need to say this, and as I was talking with Kim yesterday in preparation for this, that not only the responses and insight we got from the employees was it second to none. This was probably one of our better projects in a long time in terms of employees trying to give us the best insight they could. Our interactions with the departments have been mostly positive. And I have to give a special shout out to your human resources department in terms of the amount of organization and timeliness that kind of kept the wheels turning on this process. And so again, I need to make certain that as a board, you're aware of that sort of activity as well. The market data, and we'll talk about that briefly in just a few minutes here. Having to analyze each and every one of the jobs, that we did your process back in 2012 going into 2013. One of the things that was asked of us at the beginning is that we wanted an original project. And so we took special care that we did not look at one item relating to prior job evaluation ratings. We based everything off of current data, our current interactions with the departments. One, so we had an original look. Two, understanding that jobs evolve over the course of time in an 7 to 8 year span. That certainly was indeed the case. And there was lots of conversations in terms of how jobs have changed. We met with each department. In that case, it was in the middle of COVID, so we had to meet with them virtually. Very good interactions, very helpful for us to kind of dot the I's, cross the T's as it relates to how we viewed the world. And then shared with departments a draft hierarchy. When I say that, no money attached. Money confuses lots of things. And in real life and when doing compensation studies as well. But here's how positions are, resorted to one another and receive feedback. A much more meaningful process for larger departments and smaller ones. We understand that. And there's a few things that and I will allude to at the end here, that we need to tidy up before we get back to you in presumably October. We had very good conversations with the committee and some insights and some guidance in terms of where we should head with this. We're sitting here today with the informational session, and so hopefully everything goes swimmingly well. If there's questions, I would encourage you to either ask them today or get them to Human Resources so we can answer them in advance of any action to adopt. And like I said, the executive summary is in pushing towards its final stages right now. There's a few things we need to clean up. Adoption, and then after the adoption, going forward with an appeals process. Okay. I've done that before. She's embarrassed. I'm sitting here. I had a plan. I'll take a quick tangent here. I had a project down at the city of Kenosha. Oh goodness. I can tell you, I couldn't tell you the date, but I could tell you exactly when. I'm sitting in the back of the room. The Wisconsin Badgers are playing the national championship basketball game. And everybody's trying to get through the city council meeting. And I'm smart thinking, I'm going to put the game up on my phone in silent mode. Except for I forgot to put the game in silent mode. So I've done that myself. No reason to be embarrassed. And of course the Badgers lost, but. So from a market standpoint, this is a big deal for most of the projects we work with. And I know when we went back to 2013, I think the general model, and I think everybody at that time, including, as Lance alluded to, that in 2012, when I was still at Calumet County, we did a project before I jumped over to the consulting world. Everyone was struggling with this whole notion of what is the marketplace? The old historical method was from a bargaining model, who's closest to us and maybe who's a little bit like us as well. And that was kind of the structure. And as we've kind of found our way over the course of the last decade or so, that it's really, who is that marketplace of those employers who are similar in structure, ideally relatively proximate, but we also know that for a number of the positions in your organization that you are looking beyond the general local marketplace. You know, if I look at you, Portage County, Marathon County, you make up the heart of central Wisconsin. And so when we look at this, and this was revised about three and a half years ago when we did a market viewpoint for you, that we said it's important to have some of the local employers, but some of those local employers are so much smaller, so much different in structure and organization than Wood County that we felt it was better to go down a different path. This is reflective of those decisions that were made a couple of years ago. And so if you look, you take the heart of the Chippewa Valley, you know, the Eau Claire, Dunn, and Chippewa counties, a little bit of the Fox Valley, a little bit of the northern part of south central Wisconsin. So you're getting those counties that are similar in complexity, similar in size, some locality to it, knowing that you recruit for some of your jobs, which is why you see some of the cities in there as well from the general central Wisconsin area, trying to get a reflection of that marketplace in the jobs for which you're competing, like I said, organizations of a similar structure. So that's the marketplace that we used for this process, as well as the last time we looked at your compensation structure. From a job evaluation standpoint, I put here, you know, just a quick slide in terms of why job documentation matters. It does. For us, it's one sliver. You can see that area highlighted in yellow. For classification, for matching to the marketplace, so on and so forth, it's incredibly important. The job documentation serves you much longer than that, and for many, many other reasons. We often get asked the question, what is the employee's voice? In terms of arriving at that job documentation, I'm not going to read through these, the high-level bullet points are enough for me. Who completed the JDQ? If you're an individual employee, if you're only one in your job, you get to fill out a JDQ. And we received that from the employees. We had some vacancies. We still have some vacancies, and you always have some vacancies that oftentimes management has to fill out the JDQ in those circumstances. Or we might have, I'll just pick on my job, you might have CNA or truck driver in a highway department where there's multiple incumbents, and we gave them 3, and actually we invited them if there's a 4th, 5th, or 6th way of arriving at a single JDQ for a job, they could do that. But again, the job documentation was the employee's voice. When we had the employees fill it out, we asked the departments not to edit or delete or overwrite any of the employees' comments on the JDQ. There were sections for them to provide their input, so we had clean documentation. Where there were disagreements, we could iron those out. But again, this was the source of the employees' input into this process. When we evaluate our jobs, and this should look familiar if you were on the board, you know, dating back to the original study 8 or so years ago, we evaluate every single job in your organization for the content of the job, looking at 5 major factors. In those factors are sub-factors, and that's really where the work occurs. So if I use decision-making as the example, you know, we ask, and when we look at each job, we look at what types of decisions is the position expected to make on a regular and ongoing basis. And there are different levels of decisions that we look at. We also look at over what slice of the organization are they making decisions for. Is it primarily for their job? Are they making decisions for the entire department, or multiple departments, or the entire organization? And as you can imagine, most jobs kind of gravitate towards job focused or department focused, and fewer in terms of multiple departments. And the last piece of the decision-making factor that we talk about are, okay, well now we know the types of decisions and the slice of the organization where they have authority to make decisions. What are the actual types of decisions? Are they handing information off? Are they making suggestions? Something doesn't look right, so I need to weigh in and tell people to kind of make corrective action. Do I get a vote in that final decision? It's usually a hallmark of a professional level or higher type of position. Or do I have the final decision-making authority? And each one of those factors, I just went through one of those, but we're looking for what is expected of the job on a regular and ongoing basis. You know, education and experience also being a factor. We're looking at not what the employee possesses, what's required to fill the job. And so again, looking at those factors, each one of those factors has point values, and we can begin to build a hierarchy around that that then begins to help us make decisions. As it relates to market competitiveness, you're going to see a few graphs here. The point is, with today's presentation, not necessarily that you understand every single aspect of what we did, but that we understand every aspect of what we did. And I was just going to say science, and I'd say it's probably more of a dark art than it is a science at times. But there is a methodology and there is an approach that doesn't waver from project to project. This graph right here is representative of the 103 benchmark jobs that we had for the general county structure. And each one of those has a job evaluation score. In fact, each job in the entire pay system, but these are our benchmark jobs. These 103 jobs, we knew that there were matches to the outside marketplace. We were able to match those, and so around the bottom axis is our job evaluation score, ranging from 250 to 1250, but it's a little bit narrower than that. And then going up the y-axis is the market rates of pay for each of those benchmarks. We plot that on a chart or a graph, and we hope to see a relationship. As job evaluation scores increase, so doesn't the pay. And indeed, that's the case. And in fact, if we have something that's an outlier, we need to take that separately, and maybe it's not a benchmark and address it in a different manner. But my underlying theme with this is that you've got a very solid foundation for building a pay structure. We use that R-squared value as kind of our barometer of, do we have a good model built for you that takes into account the benchmark jobs, the job evaluation scores, any variance. And generally speaking, that R-squared value says we've got about 98% confidence in our model, and the remaining 2% might be market variance. It could be any other factors out there. We're sitting in a solid basis to make some recommendations for you. And comparing those, there's another graph, for the interest of time, I kept it out, but that black line on there is representative of the current state of affairs for those benchmark jobs. And so the general county structure is about 95% of the marketplace. It's in the realm of what I would call acceptable. The other thing, when I look at this, I'm always cautious. And I need to be very careful when we're looking at this. When I say that the county is at 95% or 95.2% of the marketplace, it doesn't mean that each and every job is 4.8% behind the market. You might have one job that's 10% behind, you might have one job that's 10% above. This is intended to be a measure of overall health of your pay structure. And so you're sitting, I'd say, at a decent level. You've done things to keep it up to date. You update the jobs as they change over the course of time, and you try your best to adjust pay on an annual basis from a structural standpoint that keeps the pay structure competitive. So again, this certainly is not even close to the worst that I've seen. In fact, I was sitting in the back of the room as you were going through the rest of your agenda, and my colleague shared that they were about 18% behind the market, and how do we resolve that? So luckily, it's not my project, I don't need to worry about it, right? It's still my work. So once we know that we've got a solid market model and we kind of know where we stand, there's not heavy movement that needs to be made. And quite frankly, I would have been shocked if there would have been a huge disparity in the marketplace. We can build a pay structure. The executive summary will outline this better than I can in my brief time this morning. But if you look at that grade J is comprised of all positions that range in points from 600 to 649. That middle value then of grade J is 624.5 points. We can then, once we set those grade breaks apart, we can then build a pay structure for you. So all I do is I take that, I'm just going to bounce on you for a second here to the prior slide. We can take that equation, that y equals, that's based on this graph right here, and we can build a pay structure for you by simply plugging in 624.5 points for X, and that's where it pops out $32.35. We do that for every single one of the grades in the structure. So the next grade up would be 650 to 699 points. So you plug in 674.5, you just keep building it. So again, there's a method to our madness in terms of how we build these structures. I want to also highlight here, it's probably good as point as any now that I have it up, that your current structure ranges from 87.5% of the control point to 112.5%. Exactly that's being recommended for the new structure. There's nothing different with that. One of the things that we heard, not only from departments at the beginning of the process of Well, it seems like we're done with the structure in a flash. I mean, it's a 10-year road from the start step to the end, but still, it can go quickly. Time flies when you're having fun. But also the long-term sustainability. And that was a view that was shared, I believe, on the part of the committee, but also the departments that are concerned with trying to balance their budgets. And so what we're coming forward with as part of our recommendation is a structure that still reflects 87.5% to 112.5%. We firmly believe that you need to move employees to that control point, the median of the market, estimated median for that grade, within 4 to 6 years. In this case, you would accomplish that in 5 years if somebody indeed started at step 1 of the structure. Beyond that, it's open for discussion, and we felt and we've seen success with organizations of slowing down that movement beyond the control point. So instead of 5 steps above the control point at 2.5 percentage points on each step, we reduce that and we split it apart. So now we have 10 grades or 10 steps above the control point at 1.25%. So it helps mitigate the cost of people progressing through that structure on a year in, year out basis, and it takes it from a 10-year structure to a 15-year structure. But again, it helps with future costs as well as the implementation of the structure, I believe, in a more fiscally responsible fashion.
Let me ask you a question.
Please, absolutely.
So I understand what you're saying from a budgetary perspective, but what do you believe that does to retention?
I still think you are putting employees on a pathway to progressing through the structure. If I were to rewind, I don't know anything about what your pay schedules look like, before Act 10, but I would guess you had some pay structures that people were done in 3 years, some in 10, some in 20, and I've negotiated all sorts of those over the years. I think the challenge that we have in local government, actually I would say everywhere, but local government especially, since everything's just kind of out there for everyone to see, is the long-term sustainability. And this, I would much rather say to an employee, here's the path you're on. And we can predict and have a higher degree of confidence that you're going to be able to, if you continue to contribute to the organization, you're going to move through the structure. But it might be a little bit slower and not as aggressive, but it also means that we're going to be able to provide the same programs and services without that if I look at, by way of example, I guarantee you this conversation has occurred in this room in some way, shape, or form over the years. So you mean to tell me that an employee is going to get a 2.5% step increase, and we're going to adjust the structure by 2% next year so they get a 4% or 4.5% increase? That it's just difficult in this environment. It's difficult in any environment. So breaking that up into smaller chunks above the control point makes that an easier conversation to have, makes the system sustainable, but I also believe it keeps your programs and services sustainable, or at least helps with that.
So you don't see a negative impact? I mean, you don't have any studies that show a negative impact on spreading that out more?
I can tell you the genesis of this structure was we had several clients, I'd say in a wave of about 3 or 4 years ago, that said, well, we're going to take the typical structure, the one like you have now, where it's 2.5% steps above the control point, we're going to switch that to every other year for the same reasons that we're talking about. And as we went back, there was a great deal of frustration with the employees in the departments, tracking and, does my performance count in the off years? And we said, well, mathematically, a half step, 1.25% step every year is exactly the same as a full step every 2 years. And it just was more palatable to those organizations. Do I think the one thing I've learned long ago is I have zero ability to make everybody happy. I love it. I like it when people are happy. But I think this is that balancing act between fiscal responsibility, long-term sustainability, and retention.
Yeah, and one thing that needs to be said, the scale, or what is going to be proposed, is a reflection of the market here and now, today, and as things are. There could be, and I think there's anticipated to be, adjustments to that schedule based on cost of living raises or on market every year. Those are not reflected in the steps you see down here. So it's entirely possible that at some point in time there could be a 2% cost of living adjustment to the entire pay scale.
You will need to.
And, excuse me?
You will need to.
Yes, and that's how we keep it current. That's how we keep from ending up having to do this every 2 years instead of every 5 or 10, right? But the point is that that 1.25 step will always be there, but there could be a cost of living, and perhaps should be a cost of living adjustment at every year when we come through.
In fact, we're delivering a webinar tomorrow afternoon precisely on that very topic in terms of across-the-board structure increases.
Yeah, you owe me for advertising?
Yeah, very cool.
But I just wanted to make sure that that was where, this is not limiting the ability for the cost of living raise. It is this plus cost of living raise.
Any questions?
Mr. Chairman, do you want to take questions as we go, or?
I think if you have a question, you might as well ask Patrick while he's there, so we don't lose
Please.
track where you are. And he'll just call on you as you have your hand up or wish to speak.
I got a question on the slide that's back a couple where you're comparing Wood County to the market, and we're around 2% less. Did I get that right?
You were 95.2% of it, so you're about 4.8% behind the market overall.
Okay. My question is, does that reflect only wages on the check or the total cost of the employee to Wood County?
We are looking at base wages for this purposes of this process. We are looking at base wages only,
Not total cost.
not total cost.
All right, thank you.
I don't want to give them the short end of the stick, but at the same time, the conversation would remain essentially the same. Oftentimes, when we're dealing with nursing homes or care facilities in cities with public libraries, or oftentimes with public utilities that are owned by a city, we find that the data better aligns when we create a separate structure for those groups of employees. It was absolutely the case here. It solved a lot of problems behind the scenes in terms of making the data match up. And so our recommendation will be to have a separate structure for your care facilities, Edgewater and Norwood. You can see similar story. In fact, I just need to back up so I can see my note here. This one's about 93.6% of the market. Again, not at all surprising. The healthcare industry has been highly competitive over the course of the last several years. And so again, you can see there's a black line, that's very clear. You can see a red line, and just beneath that red line is a gray line. So the red line and the gray line on here are the marketplace and the proposed. So our proposed action is to bring you in line with the marketplace. And again, the same structure, different mathematics behind it. Just in terms of same mathematic principles, but just different graphing features. So again, two separate structures for care facility and the general county. As it comes time to making your decisions, and we've talked about some of these already in terms of your overall philosophy and strategy, what is that market of comparison? That's a big deal. And that was one of those that we had and needed to have ironed out at the beginning of the process just to make sure that we collected all the right data. The market placement, where do you want to be? As of right now, the structure is built around the principle of trying to match the median market. Now, you can certainly come up with a different philosophy of that. I would say my best estimate, well, based on the data, and there's been surveys out there, about 90% of organizations build their structures around the median or the average marketplace. And I would say probably 95%, if not more, of our clients choose that route as well. What type of a structure, we've already talked a little bit about that. I know that there's some appetite or some interest in a performance-based structure, but there's a lot of work that's needed to pull that off. And again, if that's something that's of interest to the county, we can outline those steps that would be necessary, but it's not something that we believe you're prepared for to launch today. And then the implementation plan. And that's usually in this room where that becomes the biggest topic of conversation of what are we going to have to pay to have a new structure. So and this just kind of punctuates the two major questions. This next one is hot off the presses. In fact, the survey has not yet been officially released. It will either this afternoon or first thing tomorrow morning. But every year we poll the public sectors and private sectors in the 4 main states of the upper Midwest: Wisconsin, Minnesota, Iowa, and Illinois. Wisconsin dominates the survey. We have strong roots in Wisconsin. That's where the survey started. But I think there's some very important things to note here. One, that wages are still increasing moving forward. I will tell you that I'm surprised. When I look at structural increases, that we're going to give a 2% across the board or whatever, wages continue to move. However, in our survey, we ask We ask a bunch of questions, but the two main questions that we ask of organizations, what did you do this year? What did you do for 2020? That's often the best barometer of kind of here's what's rooted in reality. And so in this case, in the public sector, it was 2.3, and in the private sector, 2.0. I think if you look at that, the story changes ever so slightly when you start looking at the union jobs versus non-union. I personally negotiated contracts in the last year that were approaching 3%, and pre-COVID, of course, but we're still seeing those trends. And we also then ask, what are you planning for next year? If you had to break out your crystal ball today, and the survey window was from June 17th to August 27th, but if you had to break out your crystal ball, what's that going to look like? Well, for the first time in a long time, we've been doing the survey for 7 years, the public sector projected is 2.02% overall, and the private sector is 1.96. In almost all instances of the last 7 years, the private sector has been about 2.2 to 0.25% above the public sector in terms of structural increases. That changed this year. What's the main reason for it? I can give you your answer, and there's two answers to it. First of all, if you look at the union increases are dragging that up. Those were decisions that were made well in advance of this COVID situation. So it's kind of hard to reverse that course, but you can see 2.3 versus an average of around 1.9. There's a big difference there. The second one, and this is a big deal, and this is a big deal across any number of surveys, World at Work, which is our professional association for compensation professionals, there's lots and lots of people who are sitting on the fence right now. 46% of our respondents said, even with 2 months to consider, we don't have any idea what we're going to do. In the private sector, I would have to imagine they need to know what does quarter 3 and quarter 4 look like for us from a revenue standpoint. From every organization, what's my health insurance renewal going to look like? What is shared revenue? In fact, I just saw the shared revenue estimates were just released today, in terms of the formal numbers. So again, as you look at this, all these things, so lots of organizations sitting on the fence. So our intent is that kind of once the dust settles a little bit, we get closer to the end of the year, to reach out to that 46% and say, what are you doing? I only raise this here, this has not much to do with the adoption of a pay structure, but there's lots of uncertainty that's still out there. But I can tell you the other piece, I would say probably very important, is that I think a lot of those 46% are sitting on the sidelines saying, this is going to be done soon. We're going to have a vaccine, or me wearing my mask everywhere I go is going to flatten the curve and reduce it. So I think maybe looking through the economy through a set of rose-colored glasses. So we're going to see some changes, but we're going to see some uncertainty. But I can also promise you that tough to fill jobs before this pandemic are tough to fill today. In some of the technical areas or some of the higher level accounting areas, engineering, so on and so forth. The workforce is continuing to get older. People might hang on a little bit longer, as a result of the recession. But again, you're going to have some compensation challenges moving forward, and some of those pressures still exist. In terms of implementation, and as I'm winding down here, I'm going longer than I even wanted to, some good questions though, you got budgetary limitations. That's the primary reason why many of the implementation decisions are made the way they are, is so you can fit within the budgetary parameters that you have set for yourself, or someone else has set for you. That we would, like I said before, I would love to make everybody happy as a result of a study. I also know that I have no control over that, so we try to be fair. When I talk about fair, can we arrive at a mathematical way of distributing the increases or distributing the implementation so it's fair to everybody, knowing that you might have somebody who's not necessarily happy? The two areas that typically come about that I would say that might cause unhappiness is, first of all, the size of the increase. Not paying any attention to what the long-term financial earning potential is. If I look at the immediate, I could be paid $25 an hour today, and the step in a grade that results in an increase could be 1 penny. And so that might be $20, in terms of an increase. I might have $5,000 more earning potential long-term that I never had before, but people tend to look at it, how's this affecting me tomorrow? The other one that oftentimes rises to the surface, and we'll talk a little bit more in the coming slide here, is that it's often most organizations, in fact, almost every organization is unable to address people's years of service. You had that last time through. I know for a fact it caused some rubs. I wasn't on the project, but I certainly had, enough information. But, recognizing everybody's years of service is cost prohibitive, and I have a number for you in the next slide here. But we also have compression oftentimes that's caused by implementation. So say, for example, I'm in one of those jobs that has been determined to be behind the market. So I look at and say the step that provides an increase for this employee who's been with you for 10 years might be step one. That's the place where they fit. When all of a sudden I need to hire somebody else in that same classification a month down the road, I'm bringing them in at step one. I've got a 10-year employee and a brand new employee side by side. That's the one that probably has the most implications, and I think we have a solution to at least mitigate that. We're not going to solve all of it, but we're going to reduce it hopefully with our implementation. Because the other part that I find is that as a decision-making body, whether it's you or the committee, that you have the right to make whatever decisions you darn well please. You're the decision makers, we advise, but I just advise organizations in terms of making exceptions because there is that slippery slope. If one of our principals, Charlie Carlson, were standing in front of you, and I believe he stood before you before, he talks about his 3 granddaughters. And if you make an exception for one, so if you have a new bicycle for one of the granddaughters, and it's not Christmas or it's not a birthday, you better have 2 more bicycles around the corner or you're gonna have trouble. The same thing applies in these situations. You make an exception for one position or one department, you better be prepared the next month, the month after that, to have those exceptions keep coming through. We took a lot of action during the course of this project to try to help some of those future concerns, such as coming up with a more defined criteria for some of the administrative classifications, so we have a better idea of how they fit in that structure, so on and so forth. So in terms of implementation recommendations, first of all, the range that it could have costed for implementation in the neighborhood, and I'm combining both the care facilities and the full county, in the neighborhood of $600,000 all the way to $2.4 million. I can have the conversation with you on $600,000. I think it's a little bit more difficult, if not impossible, to have the conversation on 2.4. And that 2.4 is a situation where you would take everybody's years of service into account and place them in a new structure in accordance with their years of service. It's hard to get off the ground with that sort of a model. So that's the full range of what it might have costed. Our recommended placement is for employees with less than 5 years of service to place them in the new structure on the step that provides an increase in pay. Now you could have somebody who might fall at step 6 or 7 just based on their structure, but there's no special exceptions for those employees with less than 5 years of service. The step that provides an increase. For those who have more than 5 years of service, the recommendation is to have a floor, if you will, for implementation purposes, the greater of step 3 or the step that provides an increase in pay. And what that does is hopefully it mitigates, where it creates a couple steps where you can bring people into the organization and reduce the amount of compression that might occur from new employees versus existing employees. And so that's the reasoning for it, and hopefully it accomplishes that. It certainly doesn't resolve every single concern that we discussed, but this was the impact and the cost impact of that. You grew from the lowest value of $600,000 to about $685,000. I believe, and I'm looking at your finance department here as I'm speaking, I believe that just the anticipated cost of step increases for next year was in the $960,000 range for purposes. So there's a mitigated cost here, but those costs continue. So the year after and the year after that, people continue to move through the structure, so there's still some movement. It's just resetting everything. The cost implication for next year is $685,000. In terms of what we have to do next, as I alluded to before, the executive summary is all but finalized. A couple corrections need to be made, but we'll release that on this Friday. Including the executive summary, we also were asked to provide some insight in terms of elected official compensation, and we'll address that. And that's one of the final things that we're working on, is providing insights and guidance on that. Job titles, that there's a number of them that were pretty easy to look at and say, yeah, this is the job title that probably fits best. And that'll be an ongoing conversation and probably has a life beyond this study, to be quite honest, as you work your way through this. But we'll get this as close as we can. There's about 6 jobs that either we've been ships passing in the night as things occur, or we just need to finalize. It's not going to affect your overall estimate hardly at all. I mean, there might be $1,000 or so variance, but we're still going to be in the same ballpark. And then as we wind this down, I went through last week and I highlighted the policy manual areas where, if this were adopted, absolutely need to be addressed, such as referring to an 11-step structure versus proposing a 16-step structure. There's some other policies that at least you want to identify that you have, and something you want to consider. So again, that's one of the final steps we also need to work on in terms of policy recommendations. But I know I've answered your questions throughout. I have just one more slide that I want to go through. I also want to make certain that I just reiterate that if you have questions today, happy to hang around if you need me to, or if they occur and it's something that you as a board member feel you need some information, especially if the executive summary does not answer it, to reach out to the Human Resources Department. They'll get those questions to me and I'll make certain that I address them in some way, shape, or form during any final action if indeed necessary. Sir?
Is this going to be sent to each
Yes.
supervisor and the executive summary on Friday?
I'm seeing Kelly nod her head. I'm sorry, just looking. Yes. This is available. Yes, absolutely.
So we're going to get it on email?
Yes.
I want to have to pop through someplace to find it.
No, you'll have it. Yeah.
That was a fairly in-depth summary, but does anybody have any additional questions as we work our way through this? Any other questions? Again, just reiterating what Patrick said, I want to thank the department heads and employees, the committees that have worked on this for a long time as we get to the final product. So any other questions? All right, I don't see any, Patrick. I think we're
great.
I think you explained everything, at least to the...
And I don't need to read this. This is just kind of our underlying principles in terms of how we believe compensation structure should work. But I thank you for your time and allowing us to present, and I look forward to meeting with you in the near future here.
All right, thank you. A couple quick notes here as we wrap this up. Yesterday, I think the county clerks across the state were a little concerned. They're resting easier today, I believe, with the Supreme Court decision that they don't have to reprint or redistribute ballots. That was solved last evening, so that's appreciated. The one that's going to, I don't know, I'm interested in seeing how it's going to play out yet. Monday, the 21st, is the Wisconsin Counties Association annual meeting. That's going to be a virtual event. 70-ish voting members and another maybe up to 1,500 people online. I'm very interested to see how that's going to work, but you're all invited to attend, and those websites have been presented. And that's about it. Our next meeting is scheduled for October 20th. Is there anything else that needs to come before this board today? Again, I'll just mention Marion. I still see you sitting in the back there. Again, congratulations and thank you for your many, many years of service. I know there's a few committee meetings yet to happen this afternoon or immediately following this meeting. And then just my last note before I adjourn this, Jake and Laura, if I could see you guys in that room for a second when we're done, I'd appreciate it. All right, anything else? At this point, then, I'll just declare the meeting adjourned. Thank you.